evening. For decades, Americans have been lectured by Democrats about character. Character matters, integrity matters, accountability matters, standards matters. We've heard it from politicians, we've heard it from activists, we've heard it from cable news commentators. We've heard it so often that you would think the principle was carved into stone tables somewhere inside the Democratic Party headquarters. And yet, here we are. The Democratic Party's preferred Senate candidate in Maine is Graham Platner, and after months of controversy, apologies, explanations, and uncomfortable headlines, Senator Elizabeth Warren proudly stepped forward and declared, "That's my kind of man." Well, Senator Warren, that may be the most revealing political statement of the year. Because if Graham Platner is your kind of man, voters have every right to ask, what exactly is the standard anymore? Let's start with the first major problem facing this campaign. Not policy, not legislation, not solution, no. The defining issue surrounding Graham Platner's Senate campaign has been something much simpler. The image, the carefully crafted image. The campaign has worked hard to present Platner as an outsider, a working class fighter, a oyster farmer, a champion of ordinary Americans, a man who understands the struggle of everyday people. It's a compelling political story. The problem is that politics eventually collide with reality, and throughout this campaign, reporters have repeatedly uncovered information that raised questions about the narrative voters were being asked to believe. Questions surrounding family financial assistance, questions surrounding personal conduct, questions surrounding past statements, questions surrounding controversy that refuses to disappear. Now, let's be clear. Receiving help from family isn't a crime. Making mistakes isn't a crime. Saying something foolish years ago isn't a crime. But when your campaign is built around authenticity, voters are entitled to ask whether the image and the reality are the exact same thing. Because every few weeks, another story emerges, another explanation follows, another apology appears, another clarification is issued. At this point, Graham Platner isn't running a Senate campaign. He is running a crisis management operation with campaign signs. And then there was the controversy that continues to haunt him in his candidacy, the tattoo. The tattoo that critics point out resembles symbolism associated with Nazi SSS imagery. Platner has said he received the tattoo years ago while serving overseas and did not understand its historical significance at the time. Critics remain unconvinced. The issue isn't merely about the tattoo existing. The issue is that it became another controversy requiring another explanation, another headline, another round of damage control, another chapter in a campaign already struggling to stay focused on policy. Speaking of policy, has anybody actually heard of it? Seriously, take a moment and think about it. If somebody asked the average voter what Graham Platner's signature policy proposed is, could they answer? Most likely not, because much of the national attention surrounding his campaign has focused not on what Platner's wanting to do, but who he wants the voters to oppose. Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, and just in case anybody missed it, Donald Trump. Running against Donald Trump is not a governing agenda. It's not an economic plan. It's not energy strategy. It's not a border security proposal. It's not a blueprint for Maine's future. It's a campaign slogan, and slogans don't govern. Then came another controversy, one that shifted the conversation even further away from policy. Reporters emerged allegations that Platner exchanged sexually explicit messages with multiple women while married. The existence of those communications became even harder to dismiss after public comments from his wife acknowledged the message while defending both her husband and their marriage. And once again, the pattern repeated itself. Another controversy, another explanation, another request that voters move on. At some point, voters stop asking whether a candidate made a mistake. They start asking why controversies seem to follow the campaign everywhere it goes. Which brings us to what may be most uncomfortable comparison for Democrats, Anthony Weiner. Now, before anybody starts hypoventilating, let's be clear. There are no identical situations. No two political scandals are identical. But politically, the comparison is unavoidable. Anthony Weiner's career ultimately became defined not by policy, not by legislation, not by accomplishments, not by issues. It became defined by sexually explicit communication that overshadowed everything else. Every press conference, every campaign stop, every interview, every attempt at political comeback, the scandal became the story. And when the scandal became the story, the candidate lost control of the narrative. That is exactly the danger confronting Graham Platner today. Every time his campaign tries to pivot towards policy, another controversy drags the conversation right back to questions of judgment, credibility, and character. Which brings us to the perhaps one of the most remarkable parts of the entire saga, the reaction from the Democrats. For years, Americans were told that character was everything. The standards were non-negotiable. That accountability must apply equally to everyone. Until, apparently, one of their own became politically inconvenient. Then suddenly everything changed. Suddenly context mattered. Suddenly nuance mattered. Suddenly redemption mattered. Suddenly voters were told not to focus on controversy. Imagine for 1 second that a Republican Senate candidate had faced this exact series of controversies: a tattoo linked to Nazi imagery, past comments that generated outrage, questions about personal conduct, reports involving sexually explicit communication, questions surrounding the carefully curated public image. Would Democrats be talking about a second chance? Would cable news be encouraging Americans to focus on policy? Would Elizabeth Warren be standing on stage declaring, "That's my kind of man"? You already know the answer. Of course not. The candidate would be politically radioactive before sunset. There would be emergency roundtables, breaking news banners, calls for withdrawal, demand of resignation, wall to wall outrage. And yet, somehow, because it's Graham Platner, many of those same voices are asking voters to simply move along. Nothing to see here. Focus on policy. Policy? Now, where we're supposed to focus on policy, another month of headlines dominating controversy, apologies, explanations, tattoos, and sexting allegations. Now we're supposed to pretend this race has been about policy all along. That's rich. The truth is that voters are perfectly capable of making their own minds. They can decide whether the explanations are convincing. They can decide whether the controversies matter. They can decide whether Plattner deserves a seat in the United States Senate. But they should also remember something else. This election is not about a referendum of Graham Platner. It's about a referendum of the standard Democratic claims to believe in. Because when Elizabeth Warner declared, "That's my kind of man," she may have unintentionally revealed more about the Democratic Party than she did about Graham Platner. If character matters, it should matter all the time. If accountability matters, it should apply to everyone. If standards matter, they shouldn't disappear when the candidates appear to wear the right party label. And that's the question Maine voters will ultimately answer. Not whether Graham Platner can survive another controversy, but whether selective standards deserve another victory. For Englebrook Independent News, I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Good night.